My name is Pete, and welcome to my garage. I previously did a review on the FiTech EFI system that replaces a carburetor, so it's a throttle body system. Well, this is the FiTech Ultimate LS EFI system, and this one is the 750 horsepower setup that comes with 55-pound injectors. But what is nice about this setup is that it comes with a harness that is actually a really nice harness, and it's nice and compact. It comes with fuel rails. Here, the fuel injectors, like I said, 55-pound fuel injectors, an intake manifold, a throttle body, the ECU over here, and the fuse block to run the ECU and power up all the injectors and everything. It does have the coil connectors, so you run your factory LS truck coils, which works pretty well. It also has the ability to run an automatic transmission, and we've left this on here on this vehicle. Actually, I personally did not do the install on this one. It was brought to me to kind of fine-tune it and kind of fix a few things, but it does have a special transmission harness. It can control a 4L60E or a 4L80E transmission, except this one has an NV3500 manual transmission. This one is only a 4.8 liter, so it's not gonna, hopefully it's not gonna destroy this the NV3500. But there are a few things that you need to take into consideration whenever you're deciding, do I want to do like a standalone EFI system like a FiTech, or do I want to go with a factory style ECM? Now, there's a couple pros and cons of each, and I'll go over that. Okay, first I'll start with the pros of the FiTech system. Like I said, it comes with the intake, fuel injectors, rails, throttle body, all that sort of thing. One thing is it doesn't come with the throttle cable bracket, so you have to source that through FiTech separately, which is weird because I don't know how else you would connect, to an aftermarket setup if it didn't come with it. I suggest that they make that to where it comes with it. But yeah, it works really well on a setup that wasn't really intended to, to have a fuel injected engine. However, in this case right here, personally, I would have gone with a factory style setup because in order to get the gauges to work, you had to run a factory style ECM, such as this one right there, the stock ECM. This vehicle was originally a 2.2 liter 4-cylinder, so what I had to end up doing is wire in the factory PCM with a small harness to run the gauges because they worked off of CAN bus. So the person who did the swap on this thing told the customer that, hey, you need to get aftermarket gauges to get it to work, and that's just not so. From the FiTech system here, there are a couple of wires that come off of this computer. One of them is for the tach signal out, and the other one is for the speedometer signal out. So that ties in with the harness that runs over to that computer. So that gets those two gauges working, but like the fuel gauge, the coolant temp gauge, and the oil pressure gauge had to use that factory ECM right there. So that almost negates having a standalone setup because we still have to have the factory setup over there. So now we have two ECMs, one right here, one over there, but it seems to work okay. Another thing you need to take into consideration is your accessory drive. So any kind of LS swap you do, you have to take into consideration how the accessory drive is going to run. And on this particular vehicle, we've been running into alternator issues. Still not 100% sure we have it resolved yet. It keeps mowing through alternators for some reason. I'm not really sure why. The FiTech system is controlling the alternator on this particular setup. So I wonder if that might be part of it. I don't know. We haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet. Now, since the FiTech is controlling the alternator, it's clearly wired for some specific alternator. Originally, when this was brought to me, it had an alternator on it from a 2000 Chevy pickup. Well, it kept mowing through those, so now we've switched to the regulator style for an 05 pickup, which is what FiTech said they actually wired it for, but nowhere in the instructions does it say anything about that. So a little tip, get an alternator for an 04 or 05. Just make sure your connector lines up, and we actually repin the connector to the small 2-pin connector on this one, and hopefully that takes care of our alternator issues that we've been running into. Now, the relay box here, it's got a couple relays for the FiTech system, and the FiTech system has the ability to control the fans. However, you have to run a relay for the fans. And I think they should actually make part of the fuse block to have an add-on relay kit or something to be able to control that. So I actually had to wire in another relay that I put right there for the fans in order to run the electric fans. So you got to source another fan relay. So that is one con to the system. Now, I did tie this into the actual fuse block. Anytime you tie in anything on a EFI system, either use heat shrink butt connectors, which do look a little bit clunky, or I prefer to heat shrink the connectors. I like to solder and heat shrink all the connections, therefore you don't have to worry about them rattling loose. Now, doing something like this, where you just have the wires twisted and electrical taped, is not going to fly on this, and you're going to have problems with poor connections. The vehicle's going to die. You're going to have all sorts of issues. So it's a real easy setup to get up and running. A little bit of the fine tuning we've been running into various things. One thing we ran into, now I'm not sure where fault lies here, but we did have a problem where this thing was running so rich on one cylinder it actually hydrolocked the engine. And the number 6 injector back here was completely stuck wide open and just spraying 100%, wide open fuel. And when I took apart the fuel rail or took it off, it was every single one of the injectors on this side were really bad. They were full of a bunch of metal and black stuff, and not really 100% sure where it came from. The injectors over here were a little dirty too, so I had to clean those out. So we had to replace this injector, and FiTech actually replaced that for us. So that is, bonus to FiTech. They went ahead and replaced that for us. And the only thing I can think of is that this fuel rail over here, when they machined it, might have still had some debris in it from machining out the aluminum. It's the only thing we can come up with. We've taken fuel samples from the tank, the filter, pre-filter, post-filter, up here at the rail, everything's clean. So it had to have been coming from something inside this rail right there. So make sure before you put your fuel rails and fuel injectors and everything in there that these rails are nice and clean. That is something I would definitely make sure of before you put it together so you don't run into problems. So that's just something else that we had to make sure that we took care of. All in all, it starts up and runs pretty good. The nice thing about it is there is a wideband in each exhaust, in each of the headers. So it does have dual widebands in it. And so it kind of self-tunes a little bit, for the most part. And so it kind of reaches that target air-fuel ratio. And I'll kind of show you a little bit here on the inside of the car. So let's go around the inside. Okay. Now, if you're wiring up an aftermarket EFI system, this right here is a GM vehicle. I would have used a GM EFI system personally because the GM PCM can interface with programming with the GM cluster and make it a nice seamless install. That's why I went ahead and used the factory ECM just to run the gauges. So, as you can see here, I got the key on. I'll go ahead and start up. And we start up. dead battery, so it's got to do a little bit of IAC learning, and we'll hear this thing learn here in just a second. Okay, so it's doing a little bit of learning on the IAC because we had just reconnected the battery. And you can see here, it looks like our alternator's charging, so that's good. We do have a half tank of fuel, so we got the fuel gauge working because we used the factory ECM. Oil pressure's good, and our temp's coming up. You see our speedometer, our tachometer works, and the speedometer is adjustable through the FiTech. I'm going to shut this off for a second. Also in the FiTech, since it has an output for the vehicle speed sensor, I use the GPS on my phone to see how fast I'm going, and then since the FiTech can make adjustments on the fly, I would make adjustments under TAC and Speedo. I would make keys on the Speedo correction here. You can make adjustments to that and get it to work. The manual transmission, we set up the tire height, the gear ratio, and all the different gear ratios for this transmission since it's a 5-speed manual transmission. You can see we got the gear ratios in there, so all the speed stuff is correct, and that all works pretty well. As far as engine setup, you know, it's got the injector flow rate put in there from the factory. We put the cubic inch displacement in there. We have a 4.8, and the camshaft, it's a low lift cam, but it does, and then you can set the crankshaft position sensor depending on if you have a Gen 3 or Gen 4 engine, so that is nice. You can change it to a 24X or a 58X crankshaft reluctor, so depending on which sensor it has. You can set it up for whether or not you're supercharged or naturally aspirated, which is also a pretty nice part of this system. As far as the idle, you can set like the adapt max, like how much it actually will adapt. This one only has one fan on it. I have it coming on at 187 degrees. Whoa, that's weird. It's not what I had originally put it in at. That doesn't make sense. Fan on at 187 and off at 188. We'll have it come on at 190 and not turn off until it gets to about 180. All right. Have it come on and send it to the ECU, or else it will not save your last change. So any little change you make sure you push that button. We have one fan 1 enabled, fan 2 is disabled because we only have one fan. This vehicle does not have the AC hooked up and everything, but it's still enabled, so it doesn't really matter as far as AC goes. If you have an auto transmission, you can set up all your shift points and everything on there, but we have a manual. What else do we have? Knot control. For some reason, when they put this engine together, the previous people who worked on it and hooked it all up, they didn't put NOx sensors back in it for some weird reason. I had to make sure I went in and said that the knot control was disabled. This is it's pretty neat here. I'm going to go ahead and go to the large gauges so we can see the wideband part in action. We're going to go ahead and turn the RPMs up, the actual driver's AFR, the passenger, and what our target AFR is. And so we're going to go ahead and show there. Right now they're both reading pretty lean because obviously it's not running. Go ahead and start it up. FiTech does say that, I'll roll the windows up. Okay, and FiTech does say this thing's not even up to temperature yet. You know, our temperature gauge is still way down there, so it's already kind of learning the idle. And you can see, I mean, the throttle response, not bad out of a little 4.8. Alright, the nice thing about this is the data logging. Let me roll up the window again. Nice thing about it is its data logging capabilities, and we can see all this stuff on the fly without a scan tool. So we can see our spark advance right there at idle, and it's adaptive spark just like a factory ECM is, and you can change how much it adapts and everything to get your idle good. We'll see our map sensor right there. Because of the overlap on the cam, we don't get that great of a map sensor signal at idle, but that's okay with this setup. You can see we're already trimmed out pretty decent on our for our fuel trims. Target AFR is 14.4-ish. And you can see here how much it's trimmed and learned. It's constantly changing that, just like a factory ECM does, but it's not having to do it at stoik, which is really cool. It does show us what our automatic transmission stuff is, even though we're not using an automatic transmission. You can see our pulse width modulation on our fuel injectors and our injector duty cycle. So I rev it up, you can see our duty cycle kind of change. It'll give you a target RPM, what the IAC steps are, you know, all sorts of stuff. Our intake air temp right now, 89 degrees. It estimates cylinder temp off of that and the coolant temp. We can see our batteries at 13.2. So it does show you what your ignition voltage is. It takes a baro reading when you first key it up. Okay, one of the problems that I've run into with the FiTech system is that if it does store any fault codes, you can see down here we have fault code 76 and 118. And your guess is as good as mine of what these mean. So I think I need to call FiTech to see exactly what they mean. Maybe they were left over from when our alternator went bad on us, and we had low voltage issues. Not really sure what's going on there, but sure would be nice in the literature if they would actually let us know what all the fault code definitions are. Therefore, we don't have to call them anytime we have a problem. And from you know what everybody says, that their customer service isn't exactly the greatest as far as information goes. However, I will commend them on this, is on that injector issue. They did send us an injector right away, and pretty much overnighted it to us. So that made it a lot quicker to get back on the road. So commend them on that. However, I think there is a few things that they do need to take care of to make it a lot easier for someone to be able to figure out what is going on with their vehicle when something isn't quite right. Alright, we're a little bit warm here, not quite up to operating temperature, but here's a startup after it's only been ran for a few minutes. See, starts up pretty quick, settles into its idle pretty quick. We can adjust that as far as, you know, how long it stays revved up after it starts up and everything like that. But this thing doesn't really have too big of a problem idling, so you can see it's settled down in a pretty nice little idle.
Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please hit the like button. If you would like to see more content like this, please hit subscribe, and I'll get more content up as soon as I can. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments section. I'll answer them back.